Hello, it's Liz Anelli again. This time I'm going to go through a book called One Photo. You might be familiar with it. It's a very different, a very sensitive story written about the illness of a father, but it also shows the love in a family and different ways of expressing how we feel. So I'm going to read the story to you, and then we're going to do some activities. I'm going to show you how I made the artwork for the book and some step-by-step instructions how you can get some lovely drawing techniques just with a few materials you've got at home. One Photo, written by Watkins and illustrated by me, Liz Anelli. Dad came home one day with one of those old cameras, the kind that use film. He said nothing about it though. He just took the camera from its box, put it to his eye and walked into his study. "My study is my brain," he always said. Dad had his ways. Dad started doing more funny things, like putting things that belonged in the fridge in the cupboard and things that belonged in the cupboard in the fridge. The doctor told Mum this was part of the process and said to expect more of the same. "He's simply becoming forgetful," Mum explained to me. But Dad didn't take photos of the regular things people photograph. Mum asked him why he didn't want to take a photo of us, but he wouldn't say. He just put the camera to his eye, pointed it at his cereal bowl, his coffee cup, and clicked. Dad took photos of the things he didn't want to forget. When Dad finished his first roll of film, he took it to the old store in the city to be developed. He came home with a thick envelope under his arm, went straight into his study and stuck the photographs across the window. Dad finished another roll, and then another, and another. When Mum saw the window almost full with photographs, she yelled at him. "Aren't we worth remembering?" she said. Dad just looked confused, and I reminded her about him forgetting things, which included us, which made us cry. But Dad came home one day without the camera. We assumed he'd simply put it down somewhere, turned and forgotten. Then we lost Dad. Not long after, we received a box in the mail. The handwriting on the label was Dad's, and inside the box was Dad's camera. We took out the camera, walked into his study and placed it on his desk. "He should be here," Mum said. But then, by the afternoon light of the window, in the space he left behind, we noticed the film still inside. We took the film to the old store in the city and had it developed. "I don't see the point," the man said. We didn't understand. "There's only one photo," he said. And then he opened the envelope and he showed us the photo and we smiled. Sometimes one is enough. And now we see, and now we know. My dad took photos of the things he wanted us to remember about him. For this book, at the front end papers, this is a photo album that I imagine Dad might have kept of the photographs, first of himself as a little baby, and then his family through the years as he grew up and got married, and then his wife had a baby who was the little boy in the book. The end of the story, I imagined that that same camera, the one the book's all about, has now been given to the boy in the book. And so the end papers at the back of the book are the photographs that I imagined he would take as he explores all the things that he likes about his home. The first thing he does is take a picture of his own feet. There's his mum mending the gate, his toys, his home, and a photograph, of course, of himself reflected in the mirror. One Photo is a very sensitive book, and therefore I felt the medium, the technique that I used, needed to reflect that in some way, which is why I use monoprint. Monoprint is a way of making a black crumbly line that isn't quite as easy to control as your normal drawing, but gives you some really great results. So now I'm going to do with you some monoprint drawing. So monoprinting is using printer's ink, which I've got some in here, but just a very small amount of it, spread onto any kind of hard surface. It could be a sheet of metal or a sheet of plastic. I've actually got these old x-rays that somebody gave me years ago, and then you'll need a roller to roll it really smooth and really flat. And I must emphasize, you don't need very much ink for this. It's a lovely sound, to and fro and to and fro and to and fro. And to make sure you've got your ink just right, I test it. I've got some old newspaper and I just use a few sheets. Can you see it's picking up? It's not actually picking up much, so it might be okay. And then I'm also going to it's a test piece of paper. For monoprinting, you draw on the back of your print. So if I drew a smiley face, let's see what we've got. We've got a smiley face the other side. And that looks about just the right amount of ink. What you have to remember is anywhere you press, so if you put your elbow on it like that, it's going to come out on the other side of your piece of paper. So here's my piece of drawing paper, and of course the drawing itself is what the ink picks up, so it doesn't matter what you draw with on this side. I find I want something that's got a really hard point, like a ballpoint pen, so that's what I'm going to use. And now I've got to remember not to press too hard with my hand, try and keep my hand off, so it's a very funny way of drawing. Not to go and put my hands all over it. And the subject matter I'm going to draw, because one photo is about Dad's camera. So this is actually my dad's old camera that he gave to me. So it's kind of, in the spirit of the book. It's like, have you heard of the phrase a continuous line drawing? It helps if you draw in that manner, so not letting your pen leave the paper as you try to draw the object in front of you. For this monoprint workshop, it's a good idea just to pick an object, something that you know fairly well, that is a nice shape. It could be a pot plant or a teapot, a favourite toy. Everything's back to front, so if you want your writing to come out the right way round when you turn the piece of paper around, what do you got to do? You got to write it like mirror writing, which is a real challenge in itself. So this is the way that I drew all the line in one photo. And then after I'd done that, see, I can use my finger deliberately to smudge some of the texture and pattern in here. See, I'm getting some of the ink. Actually, probably haven't put quite enough ink this time. I was so worried about getting too much, wasn't I? And in the book, after I'd made the line drawings, I scanned those in to my computer using Photoshop and made a few minor adjustments to the line, but then that was the line. That's the top layer. If you know anything about Photoshop, you'll know it's all made of layers and you add more and more as you go along. The top layer was always the monoprint line. What does it look like if you rub really hard with your finger? What would it look like if you used a softer end of the pencil or a soft pencil? You might want to make some squiggle marks instead of, you see those marks there? Or maybe a really very fine grid pattern. So I can add lots and lots of details. This drawing is coming along quite well, isn't it? I think it's got a bit more ink over this side, so I might move it. It doesn't matter, you can move your print around as many times as you like. If you think the ink's better on one part of your sheet, then move it around. Now we've got some symbols around the outside. This is an old-fashioned type of camera, just like Dad had in the book, that takes film. And now let's come to the writing. It says Olympus Trip here, but I've got to write this backwards so that it comes out the right way round when, let's see whether I was right. Did I get it right? So drawing an object might be like, you might think that's a little bit too much, but just experiment with monoprinting. The first thing I want you to do is try and write your name. If my name was Sally, I would have to start with the S obviously at the end, but back to front, so S-A-L-L-Y. And da-da-da-da-da. Got it right. It's so easy to get it wrong, but it's a kind of fun challenge. You can also add tone for the background in the same way that I said, pressing your hand down, even like putting your elbows into it and seeing what happens. Or of course you can use some of those other techniques that I showed you earlier. Remember when I got the different textured